to another edition of What's So Funny, the show that probes the brains, the minds, the psyches, and the brains of the people who make the funny. I can't believe Kliph Nesteroff's last visit to the What's So Funny studios was way back in 2006. For one of our best guests to be absent from the show for so long is nothing short of a travesty. Well, I guess the powers that be wouldn't allow Kliph's return before now. What were they afraid of? God forbid we have an interesting guest who doesn't kowtow to the corporate overlords. And now, a man who always fights the powers that be, your host and MC, Mr. Guy McPherson.
I knew you had a hard-on, Kevin, for Kliph. That was a little over the top.
Was it? Too much?
A little, but you guys are kindred spirits. You really love the old entertainment stuff. Kevin does nothing but watch, TCM and old movies on DVDs. Just like you, Kliph. You guys should hang out.
We are right now.
Okay.
This is it.
Hi, Kliph. Welcome back. It's been 6 years.
Thank
almost.
You. Thank you. Yes.
I wrote in the blog today that when you were last on, and you did a number of shows here, you'd come on and play clips of old show business, old comedians. You were mostly then, I think, just an enthusiast. You just loved that era, and now you're like the foremost historian of showbiz, right?
Yeah.
It's
weird, eh?
Yeah. How did that happen?
I think maybe there's just nobody else doing it, really. Or maybe that's what it's born out of, is reading a lot of books about comedy written by people that have no connection with show business, or either know nothing about show business, or most importantly, are writing about comedy but are not funny themselves. And that can be terribly painful to read and consume as a comic or a comedian or a comedy writer, Mm-hmm. So I think maybe born out of necessity.
You did stand-up for how long?
7.5 years.
7.5. Now, when you quit, I admire this about you. You walked away from it, but did you do that with a goal in mind of what you're doing now?
No, not with a goal in mind. I was still doing radio at the time, and I think I had gotten some kind of a gig with CBC shortly before I quit, and continued on with that for a while. So I was still doing stuff related to broadcasting,
Yeah.
So I never really was fully out of it per se, but no, I didn't retire from stand-up with a goal in mind. No.
Not to become a journalist or a historian?
No, I don't like the phrase historian.
No, how would you describe it?
I like to say that I'm a writer, frankly.
Yeah. Could you be more specific, though?
Yeah, but historians, who likes historians? Is anybody a fan of any historian? No, and
But a showbiz historian, that's different.
Yeah, well, historians aren't entertaining. They're not entertainers. So I hope that when I write history, that it's at least entertaining and captivating to those that are not necessarily already huge advocates of the genre being written about. You say historian, I just think of like a 50-year-old virgin with a shitty-looking beard who doesn't know how to dress and can barely communicate with other people. I don't like that connotation, historian. And I'm just a kid.
I know. How old are you?
I'm 30.
30 now. And that blows away everyone who you interview.
Yeah.
Because you're doing them over the phone. They can't see that you're...
Yeah.
And you look younger than 30.
Yeah.
So do you know, what was the transformation? Like, was there a moment where you sort of went from... Yeah, like you did pieces on CBC radio and other... You did a show on CITR, I think, in Vancouver.
CITR FM, yeah.
Was there a moment, an interview, where you just decided to take it to this next level, or was it just sort of an evolution?
Well, do you want to establish the premise of what I do first, and then I'll explain?
Well, you're a comedy historian. Yeah, you have a blog. You write for WFMU's.
They call it Beware of the Blog.
Beware of the Blog, yeah. Kliph Nesteroff's posts on there are all about showbiz from the, 30s or even before, right up to 60s?
Primarily the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, yeah. Mm-hmm. What was your question?
Oh, yeah, the transformation, that moment where you're sort of being an enthusiast to now you're the guy.
Taking it to the next level. Well, one of the moments was fairly recently, actually, in terms of doing interviews with show business notables from the past. What really spawned that I had already been writing about show business, but I always had anxiety issues with interviewing people, especially people that you admire or that you think highly of, and to phone them out of the blue sometimes and cold call and say that you want to interview them, and then trying to explain to them what the internet is, people in their 70s and 80s and 90s, to try and convince them that it's a worthwhile thing, that more people will read it and see their name than if they were reading a book, could be very difficult. And I didn't want to come across as an ass or to disturb somebody who doesn't want to be disturbed. So I didn't really interview anybody for the background of my articles. I would write based on previous sources, but didn't procure from original material mostly. But then I got an email in March 2010 from a writer at Vanity Fair. And 2 weeks later, I got an email from a different writer at Vanity Fair, completely unrelated. And they were just really nice fan letters saying, I read your article on WFMU about the early David Letterman. And then a couple weeks later, this other guy said, I read your article about the early Woody Allen. Just fantastic. Just keep it up. Great stuff. And since they were both from Vanity Fair, I thought, well, maybe I should pitch some stuff to Vanity Fair if these people like my stuff. One guy was named Mike Sachs, and the other guy was named Jim Windolf, both contributing editors at Vanity Fair then and now, both good writers. And so I floated by a couple ideas by them. I said, do you think I should pitch this stuff? Is there somebody you can put me in contact with? And they put me in contact with Dana Brown, who's the executive editor of Vanity Fair. And I pitched some stuff to them. And they said, oh, this sounds good. And one of the articles I pitched was about the Mel Lyman cult, not specifically related to show business, but the Mel Lyman cult inspired the Manson cult, and Mel Lyman was a folk singer, a banjo player, and considered the greatest banjo player in the 1960s, who formed a commune in which...
It was a community.
Yes. Oh, have you read this article?
Yeah. No, I didn't read the article. I read your interview with Dick Cavett.
Yes.
And I saw the clip of them on Dick Cavett's show. Anyway, continue on.
Yes, that's right. So this cult, the Mel Lyman cult, had in it two people, Mark Frechette and Daria Halprin, who were cast by Michelangelo Antonio in a film called Zabriskie Point, which is a well-known mediocre film of the late 60s. And they took these parts and the amount that they got paid from MGM to help finance this cult. And when they were doing their promotional junkets, these two cult members went on the Dick Cavett show. And Dick Cavett said, please welcome the two young stars of Zabriskie Point. And while he was interviewing them, he said, I understand you two live in a commune outside of Boston.
Excuse me, he said commune. Anyway.
He did. He said commune.
Yeah.
Dick Cavett said commune because it wasn't in the lexicon yet. It was still the late 60s. Everything was new.
Yeah.
And Mark Frechette took a real objection to this, and he said it's not a commune, it's a community, like real bitchy like. And Dick Cavett said, well, what's the difference? He said, the difference is that our purpose is to serve our leader, Mel Lyman.
Yeah, I know. and Dick Cavett just let that slide.
Yeah, and
you go, what?
You're like, what is that? Well, it turns out that they were in this cult, right? They were under the spell, if you will, of this wafy little folk singer who was leading this weird cult. Anyways.
How long, sorry to interrupt, how long had he been a folk singer? Was he well known at the time? I don't know him.
Mel Lyman was fairly well known in the folky circle, in the Harvard Square circle that spawned Joan Baez and Bob Dylan. So yeah, he was a mover and a shaker, and so was a guy named Jim Kweskin of the Jim Kweskin Jug Band, and that's his name. I don't have a lisp, but
and what do we know of the cult or the commune?
I don't really know how to describe it, but it was very much of the hippie era. It was about dropping out from normal society, but the purpose was to experience reality to its fullest, only things that are real, and this included beatings, brutality, to feel real pain. It's hard for me to describe, but Mel Lyman was the guy, and these were the two kids that were, among others, in the cult, and they were high profile because they were in Zabriskie Point. And so I wanted to write this article about the cult, and I wanted to maybe speak with Dick Cavett because he had these two kids on his show, before they were known as cult members. A couple of years later, it came out, they were in this cult, and Mark Frechette robbed a bank to try and raise money for the cult, and he ended up dying in jail. Anyways, Vanity Fair said, sounds like a good idea for an article. Greenlit, go ahead and write it. But the stipulation is we want new material, so you got to secure some interviews with some people. If you can get an interview with Dick Cavett, full speed ahead. So on that basis, I went and said, okay, well, I'm going to interview Dick Cavett or try and track him down. I also talked to the woman who was in charge of MGM publicity, who had to take those two cult members around from show to show to show.
To plug the movie.
And how difficult that was. And I wrote this article for Vanity Fair. So I had to get over my anxiety of talking to people for interview purposes in order to, try and get this article published in Vanity Fair. And since then, I have continued to interview people, primarily the purpose to generate material for the articles I'm writing. And now, sometimes just interviewing people to have it in the bag before they die. For whatever purpose I might use it for in the future.
Yeah, you got to act quickly with the subjects you're working with.
Yeah.
You said this was 2010-ish?
Yeah, March 2010, yeah.
Seems though that you've been doing these interviews. I think the last time you were on, 2006, you had talked about Woody Woodbury. Now, was he one of your first?
He was the only person I interviewed. I was doing a zine in 2003. Yes. While I was doing stand-up, I was doing a zine. Briefly, photocopying expenses are enormous. And you think of doing a zine, it's something like a
punk,
a broke punk kid does, a kid on the street asking for change. You do a zine, it's like do it yourself. It's the cheap way. That is a misnomer, my friend. It is not the cheap way. Photocopying expenses are enormous, and you got to get one of those big long fucking staplers that will staple the middle of a magazine. Regular stapler doesn't do that. There's all kinds of hidden expenses in doing a zine, which is why the whole zine industry died in the late 90s after the economic downturn at the end of the Clinton years. So blame him. So I was doing a zine in 2002, 2003 called Generation Exploitation. And I interviewed old-timey comedian, forgotten man, Woody Woodbury, best known to record collectors and vinyl enthusiasts because he was a comedy record bestseller, but was never really a name in television or film. And you can still find his records in every thrift store in North America. And when I discovered he was alive in 2003, I was like, I got to interview this guy because I've always had these records and other people have these records and nobody knows who the hell he is. So I thought I would track him down and talk to him and say, who the hell are you? And that's exactly what we did. And then I published the transcript in that zine. And that was the one and only interview that I did.
Oh, really?
I never did another one. Other people said, that was really great. You should do more of those. And I said, yeah, I should. And I never did.
Until 2010?
Yeah, with one exception. But I really regret not having done it back in 2002, 2003, because so many people have died since then that were big names, people like Buddy Hackett, and Jan Murray, and people like that have since perished, and I'll never be able to speak with them. And that would have been really great if I could. So now I'm trying to talk to as many people like that that are still alive, from Shecky Greene to Jack Carter, and I've got a plethora of numbers on my desk that I haven't called yet of all kinds of people, from Carl Reiner to Mort Saul to Dick Gregory. So
got to get on it.
Yeah,
got to get on it. And what happened with the Vanity Fair piece?
The Vanity Fair piece, that and a couple other articles that they greenlit. One about Cary Grant, one about Errol Flynn. Never came to fruition. The guy who had actually brought me on board and was like my managing editor for my stuff greenlit the pieces. They said, we'll pay you this amount and we'll run it in this issue on this date. While I was writing these articles, I did not know. The guy who was in charge of my account, as it were, left the magazine. I don't know if he got fired or if he quit, but he moved to Esquire, and everything that was on his desk died when he left. And I contacted a couple other people, and they said, no, he left the magazine. And I said, well, there was this piece that was supposed to be going through, and they said, no, it's all done.
Nice. Did you contact Esquire?
He's not in a hiring position or an editorial position there.
Well, that's a shame, because there should be a place. People, more, as you say, more people can read them on the internet, but it's nice to be.
It would have been nice to have Vanity Fair as the byline, but I mean, it's nice to know that there's people there that think I'm worthy of that, I suppose. But yeah, it fucking sucked, guy. It really fucking sucked. It was the shittiest. God damn it, that pisses me off.
And no kill fee or anything.
No fee, no nothing. And would you believe this? I had written this article about Cary Grant and his experiences with LSD, which you could read on the WFMU blog still. The August 2010 issue of Vanity Fair came out and had a big feature article, big lead article of the August 2010 Vanity Fair. The name of the article was Cary Grant in the Sky with Diamonds by Kari Beauchamp of Vanity Fair. And my piece came out in February or March 2010 on the internet, but I had originally pitched it to Vanity Fair.
Did they draw from your article?
No, there is nothing plagiarized, but nobody else had ever written a piece about Cary Grant's LSD use.
And did you contact them or contact Kari?
No, I still had hopes that at some point I would be maybe on their team, as it were, so I didn't want to burn any bridges, and it could have been parallel thought, you know.
Could have been, but I think you make a pretty good case for it not being. We're talking with Kliph Nesteroff. The show's What's So Funny on CFRO 102.7 FM. I'm Guy McPherson. So, Kliph, how many entertainers have you talked to now?
Oh, I haven't counted. I don't know. I don't know. But
like in the 20s, hundreds?
Yeah, I would not say hundreds. We're approaching 100, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But and several people now I've done multiple interviews with, follow-up interviews. If I find a subject that is really lucid, has had a interesting career, and is just a great raconteur, you know, I don't hesitate to call again. Mm-hmm. Shecky Greene, I did 2 interviews with until he refused to talk to me ever again. I'm pretty sure he's still mad at me.
Explain that one.
I interviewed Shecky Greene twice to write an article about Shecky Greene. I wanted to dispel or at least establish what Shecky Greene is all about. And everybody, you know, knows the it's not even a name, it's like a word. It's a noun and a verb and an adjective. The name Shecky, it just means the connotation is a old-timey, kind of hacky, has-been comic, you know, Shecky. And you see characters use that name Shecky in all kinds of things.
Hear that?
But several times. I mean, multiple people have used the name Shecky. But in reality, there's only ever been one person named Shecky, and that's Shecky Greene, and he's still alive. And nobody of the last 20, 30 years, including myself, knows what he was about. We kind of confuse him with Henny Youngman. We think that Shecky Greene and Henny Youngman are kind of the same thing, you know, the one-liner kind of comic and an old-timey guy. So I kind of investigated Shecky Greene's life and act a bit and talked to him personally. And the reality is that Shecky Greene was actually the most experimental comedian of his time, that he had no set act, really, and was just a wild improviser and a wild man on and off the stage in the 1950s and 60s in Vegas, and that every comedian, whether they were of the Mort Saul sort of erudite variety, or if they were the old-timey sort of brash Jan Murray, Red Buttons, Jack Carter style, didn't matter what side of the comedy spectrum they were on, they all agreed that Shecky Greene was the funniest comedian of all, which might be surprising to people today who assume that the name Shecky means, you know, crummy. So I interviewed Shecky Greene to get background for this biographical article that I wrote for WFMU, and it's really the only substantial thing that's ever been written about Shecky Greene. I guess it came out about 2 months after the last interview with Shecky, and he read the article, and I came home one day, and there was a very angry message on my voicemail from Shecky Greene. And he said, Mr. Nesteroff, this is Shecky Greene. Somebody sent me this article that you wrote. I just could not believe it. I mean, where did you get this shit? Where did you get this shit about Buddy Hackett? Did I tell you that shit? I don't think so. Where did you get this? I just could not be more upset. Could you call me? And that was the message. So I heard that message.
What were you thinking?
Well, I was upset. I was like, oh my God, I've upset this legend. You know, that's my big fear about cold calling people of that stature. You know, I don't want to piss anybody off. And the other thing was I was a bit confused because if you read the article, it's a glorification of Shecky Greene, talking about how people assume things about that name and have the incorrect connotation in mind.
And he couldn't get past that little introduction. People think he's tacky.
Perhaps. So I did phone him and said, "Hey, Shecky, it's Kliph Nesteroff. I got your message." He goes, "Yes, I did you write that article about me in the paper?" I said, "No, I wrote something on the internet." He goes, "You write something about me?" I go, "Yeah, remember we did those interviews? I was writing the thing." He goes, "On the computer, right?" I go, "Yeah, on the computer." He goes, I couldn't believe that. I mean, what the hell was that?" I said, "Well, I don't understand what you're mad about. It was a glorification." He goes, "I thought it was very derogatory. Very derogatory." I go, "Well, Shecky, I don't understand. I'm supposed to be an homage." And he goes, "Homage? Homage? That's homage?" I go, "Well, yeah." He goes, "Where did you get this shit? Where did you get that story about Buddy Hackett? Me having a fight with Buddy Hackett?" I go, "Shecky, you told me that story. I got it from you." He goes, "Yeah? Maybe you should record the interview." "You record the interview?" I go, "Yeah, of course I recorded the interview." He goes, "Quiet." He goes, "Yeah, well, you made it sound terrible. What about this guy Goldman? You talk about some guy named Goldman. Who's that?" I go, "I was quoting from a book by Albert Goldman called Ladies and Gentlemen, Lenny Bruce, and there's a quote in there from you and your relationship with Lenny Bruce." He goes, "Oh, so let me get this straight. You just take shit out of other people's books, put them in your article, and you call that writing. I think maybe you should get into a different business." I said, I'm sorry, Shecky, that you're so mad." And then I hear all this yelling in the background. And he goes, just a second. She wants to talk to you." It's his wife, who I've never talked to before. And she gets on the phone. She goes, "Could you just print it off and mail it to him? He can't see. He doesn't like sitting at the computer, and he won't stop. So could you please just mail it?"
And did you?
No. I took down their address, and then I phoned Jack Carter, legendary comedian Jack Carter, who I've become close with over the past year. Jack Carter and Shecky Greene go back to the early 50s together, and they're both very prolific nightclub comedians. And so I phoned Jack Carter for advice. I said, "Jack, Shecky Greene's mad at me. I don't know what to do. I'm all upset. He's all upset. He wants me to send this thing." And Jack goes, "Shecky's mad at you, huh?" I go, "Yeah." I said, "Uh-huh. Just forget it. Just forget it. That's Shecky. He'd be mad no matter what. Just forget it." And if you read the article, it's true. He would be mad no matter what. So I forgot it, but I haven't talked to him since because I don't want to rekindle this hostility.
Maybe he's forgotten completely.
I hope so.
He might be at that age where you go, "Kliph, who? What?
I hope so.
Let's talk."
I hope so. He tells great stories, so I would have loved to have talked to him a third and fourth time. But he was pretty pissed off at me.
Yeah, and I guess part of the misconception about Shecky is that there isn't a large sample of his work that we can see.
No.
Right? Or even here, did he do albums? I know you collected albums.
He actually put out 3 small-time albums.
And were they reflective of how great he was?
Well, this is what everybody else that I talked to says, that you could not take Shecky's act out of the nightclub setting and have it translate. Because he used to do Carson all the time. He used to do the Dean Martin show. But they gave him 5-10 minutes. And what everybody said was that it took him like 20 minutes to warm up. He'd get on the stage. He didn't have like jokes to jump into. He'd be talking about the curtain. He'd be talking about how overpriced the food is. He'd be talking about how much of an asshole the guy who ran the hotel or the club was. And then he would gain momentum. And he was a real improviser. And he would go off for an hour or two. And on top of that, he was known for drinking heavily and being extremely funny when he was drunk. Pat Cooper told me that he saw Shecky Greene perform at the Tropicana Hotel in Vegas, climb the curtain of this giant backdrop and do his whole show from on top of the curtain, And nobody has ever been really able to tell me or cite a specific Shecky Greene joke because it just didn't, there wasn't one. It was just a different, wild, and crazy show every time. So I haven't even really seen Shecky Greene's act before, but everybody who saw him in a nightclub says he was the greatest ever.
Yeah, and a lot of times I feel anyway, those improvisatory stand-ups get a little more credit than maybe they should, because part of it is, they're just creating this, or giving that impression a lot of times, but I assume that he was just creating it. And so you tend to give him a bigger laugh because, like, he just thought of this in the moment, right?
Yeah, live. But once it's taped, it doesn't translate.
No,
if you see
not at
somebody
all.
doing crowd work on television, like talking to the audience, "Hey, ma'am, where are you from? Nice hat," and everybody in the audience is laughing, you're sitting at home not laughing.
Right.
And even with a lot of set material, a lot of stand-up just doesn't translate to TV, and I'm not sure why. I've never really understood. But the best comparison I can give is a play of any kind, a Broadway play, a stage show, and then watching a videotape of a play. It always looks horrible. It always looks horrible.
It does.
It could be the greatest Broadway show of all time that you're watching live that is just leaving you breathless, and then you see film footage of it. The news will say, "Tonight at the such and such theater, the show is blah, blah, blah." And they'll show footage of the rehearsal or of the show the night before, and it just looks
Stiff.
awful.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's what happens with stand-up as well. It loses translation when it's brought to television. Sometimes it works, but it is a live medium, and that's really, I guess, its essence.
So was that interview, it sounds like the first interview went well, and it wasn't until he read it that he was upset.
Well, we did 2 interviews, and I transcribed them as transcripts. And those were fine, but it was the article that those interviews were
Yes.
the basis for.
Yeah.
So they were separate. The interviews were fine. It was the end result, the article that he read, that he did not care for.
Have you ever had any that were just really difficult? They weren't cooperative?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I most of the interviews that I've done have gone extremely well. There's some people that are, like any interview subject of any kind in any genre, some people are just better interviews than others. Some people, you just ask them one question and they can just go for a half an hour and they're great. Other people, it's a little bit more work. They don't offer as much. But the only one that was a real prick was Marty Allen of 60s comedy team Allen and Rossi, the most popular, unfunny comedy team of the last 60 years.
I just remember him as a single act. Marty Allen. He was on every TV show.
Yeah, he never did a single act, but he did appear standalone as a game show contestant or a game show.
He was on talk shows, and he just looked funny with the hair. And
he had
everything.
crazy hair.
Yeah.
And just a horrible person.
Now I want to say, I read that interview, and it seemed fine to me, except for where you would put in things like Kliph Nesteroff, silence. Like, if you had taken that out, you wouldn't have known that there was any sort of awkwardness to it.
Yeah, he was a bit combative.
Yeah?
I don't know if it's all in the transcript, but he answered a lot of questions with the word "so," like a hostile "so." I would ask him a question, and he'd go, "Huh? So?"
You said you were in an early comedy team with so-and-so, and he was, so what?
Yeah.
And so as you in the moment, what are you thinking?
I don't know what I'm thinking. I mean, I have a huge list of questions that I
Right.
can go to. Hopefully something will catch. It was interesting. He had been in different comedy teams before his successful one. So I was asking him about some of the more obscure ones. And he was with a guy named Mitch DeWood. But they were a team for 9 years, which is quite a long time.
Yeah, sure.
So I said, what can you tell me about Mitch DeWood? And he went, who? I said, Mitch DeWood. Huh? You were in a comedy team with him for 9 years? Oh, yeah. Yeah, Mitch.
Now, to take his side for a moment, could it be that, he's 89? Could it be that he didn't hear you say it and he was going, who?
Maybe. But the funny thing is he heard me say other things. And then I had to complete the interview, I think, 2 days later for some reason. I can't remember why. So we did a follow-up 2 days later. And everything went as smoothly as it could go with him. And then I got to Mitch DeWood again, and I said, now I wanted to ask you a little bit more about Mitch DeWood. And he said, who? I said, Mitch DeWood. And he goes, huh? I said, you were in a comedy team with him for 8 or 9 years. Oh, yeah, Mitch. It was exactly verbatim. And people that read the transcript said it seems like there's something more there.
Yeah.
And then I asked somebody else, I can't remember who, maybe Pete Barbuti, I don't remember, but somebody said that Marty Allen had ended up sleeping with Mitch DeWood's wife, or maybe it was the other way around.
Oh.
And there was some kind of thing there.
And Mitch DeWood's not around anymore?
Mitch DeWood's dead, but he went on to book acts at the Sands or the Sahara Hotel in the 60s. He became an entertainment director of one of the Vegas hotels.
And interestingly, Marty Allen was when you interviewed him, which was this past year.
Yes.
Yeah, he was, so I guess he still is performing at the age of 89
Oh my God.
on cruise ships.
The worst act. The worst.
How do you know?
I saw a YouTube clip. Don't look it up.
I'm going to.
The
Have to
worst.
now.
Marty Allen is just the worst. He wasn't funny in the 60s. I never understood it. The biggest anomaly. They became the biggest stars, Allen and Rossi. They had best-selling records. They were on every TV show.
Hello there.
And they were never funny. Bill Persky from Dick Van Dyke show, Writing Fame, Bill Persky, was offered a job writing for Allen and Rossi at the height of their fame. Big money. And he went and saw them perform at the Copacabana, the luscious nightclub in America at the time. And he couldn't take the job. He couldn't in good faith write for these guys because he just thought they were just the lousiest people and didn't want to be involved with such a dreck. Even if he'd be the one that maybe could have made it better. He had no desire.
My favorite moment of that interview with Marty Allen that you did was talking about a film that they did about spies or something.
Yes.
He asked if you had seen it, and you said, I watched as much as I could. And he was like, "No, it's a very excellent film."
Yeah.
And he kept using, "No, it's really excellent." And then you posted the trailer for it.
Yeah.
I wouldn't describe it as excellent, but maybe in its day it was something.
Yeah, it might be enjoyable as a camp classic, but the thing was I'd already talked to Steve Rossi of Allen and Rossi, Marty Allen's comedy partner, and Steve Rossi told me that movie, The Last of the Secret Agents, was a great regret. It was just a piece of garbage, that they wanted to do their material and they weren't allowed, and that it was just a miserable experience for everybody. And then when I talked to Marty Allen a few months later and mentioned Last of the Secret Agents, he said, "Oh, it's a very excellent film.
Very excellent.
People said if they re-released it or put it on DVD, it would be called a comedy classic."
Yeah.
So it was a weird disconnect between the two.
I've always felt that you have to do some sort of mind time traveling when watching old time show business.
Sure, you have to look at it through the prism of the era. There's
That's
no
right.
question about it.
Because when we're seeing it, even if it was cutting edge at one time, it's only in retrospect that it was.
Yes,
Because
but
nowadays it has been copied so much that
But
modern,
you can look at things through the prism of the era
Yes.
and realize that it sucks
well,
by those standards.
That's what I'm getting at. Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a lot of that. I mean, that's the same thing with every era. There's good and there's bad music. There's good and there's bad films. There's always going to be great art and horrible art simultaneously through every era. But something that annoys me a lot is I get emails from people that look at my website, Classic Television Showbiz, where I post these transcripts of interviews with comedy legends and also embed a lot of videos of old TV shows and old variety shows. And I get emails from people who grew up in that era who say, "Thank you so much for posting this stuff. TV was so much better then, unlike the crap we have today." And they say that like I'm on their side. Like, yeah, that's why. What are you talking about? I mean, there's great television from the 50s and 60s, and there's horrible television from the 50s and 60s. Just like today, there's great TV and horrible TV. I see that constantly.
So what's one that really stands out where maybe today some people of that era look at it as great and you just think, no, this was just garbage? I mean, Marty Allen is one that you're talking about.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, I mean, just there's terrible sitcoms from that era,
Sure.
Like Leave It to Beaver is just a lousy show.
Was it? I remember it as being good.
I mean, if you, let's say you have the DVD collection of Leave It to Beaver. One episode is enjoyable for what it is in the context of this sort of like maudlin, phony kind of capsule of white America in the 50s. But if you watch more than one episode, it's exactly the same episode after episode, and it's pretty lame, generally speaking. Then you take another sitcom from the exact same era that aired at the exact same time called The Phil Silvers Show.
That's what I was going to say.
Which is, in my opinion, the best sitcom of that era, holds up today, and it's because it's also the most realistic, even though it's over the top and cartoonish. The lead protagonist is a liar, a gambler, a womanizer, a conniver, a real human being, whereas Hugh Beaumont on Leave It to Beaver is not. He's just this one-dimensional, cardboard, bland, perfect character that has no connection with reality. And because of that, the show doesn't really hold up so much. And people make the mistake of thinking that now that in this era, that Leave It to Beaver is somehow a reflection, an accurate reflection of that era. That's what people were like.
Yeah,
That's
50s,
what society was like. That the 50s were like, Leave It to Beaver. Oh, why can't things be like that now? Why can't TV be like that now? Well, in reality, things aren't that much different. People are just as vicious and horrible and awful as they always were. It's just the filter that is presented on television might be a bit different.
I just think it's sort of there's a foreign film effect. Like when we get a foreign film here that's when we see the subtitles and we think, oh, this is fantastic. The acting is so great. And I've seen films from other countries with people from those other countries, and they go, oh, the acting was horrible. We can't tell because we don't speak that language, but the film looks great,
Sure.
And so it's kind of like that. When we're looking back, who are we to say that was a horrible show or that was great? When somebody living it and is experiencing everything that's going around at that time, there's a lot of little things that you have to factor in.
Yeah, but that being said, there is stuff that does hold up.
Sure, yeah.
And
or
that's
at least
a
is more to our current.
Well, I find
sensibilities.
that the television of that era that I enjoy the most is not the fictional shows. It's not the dramas or the comedy sitcoms. It's the stuff that has people in their sort of natural element. I like What's My Line a lot because it has 4 personalities on a panel as themselves. They're not pretending to be anybody else, and they're playing a guessing game with another real person, sometimes a celebrity, acting as themselves. I really like seeing old comedians acting as themselves. In the interviews that I do, some of the people that you may have seen on TV in the 50s and 60s and didn't think were that funny, in conversation are compelling and fascinating, just as themselves, I just prefer that often,
You are you and Kevin both. I mean, Kevin's much older than you, but most youngins today dismiss anything from before they were born. It's like, I wasn't even alive then. Why should I like that, right? And now, I imagine as a kid you still liked things from before you were born, or did this develop later?
I don't think I was conscious of what existed before I was born when I was a child. I would watch Bugs Bunny and loved it. I had no idea it was made in the 40s.
Because it was in color. That's right.
Sure.
But was there a time where you just started to head in that direction, where it's just like, everything that I like really is from another time?
Yeah, no, I don't think consciously. No, I think I saw a couple films early on late night CBC TV, films that just sucked me in. And it's interesting you mentioned foreign films. I used to go through the TV Guide and I'd highlight things. They used to have like ratings for the movies when they list them in TV Guide. I don't know who reviewed them, but it would say 3-star movie or 4-star movie. And I would
it's arbitrary,
completely arbitrary. But I would pay attention to those movies with the high star ratings and try and seek them out when I was like 13 or 14. And I remember they showed Amarcord on PBS one night, a Fellini movie, and I didn't realize that it was subtitled. I didn't know that it wasn't going to be in English. I just saw 4 stars, so I turned it on and I watched the first minute, and the subtitles came on. And I went, fuck it. But for whatever reason, I kept watching for 2 minutes, and I was right sucked in, and I watched the whole thing. It became my favorite movie of all time at the age of 14, Amarcord. And at the same time, this happened a couple other times with like films that turned out to be like black and white films. I remember watching one called Sing You Sinners, which has never been put out on VHS or DVD, but it's a Bing Crosby movie with a young Donald O'Connor. Like, I think he's 10 years old in it. Oh, and Fred McMurray. And I loved it. Like, it was just great. I don't know what it was about it that I liked so much, but the fact that it was in black and white didn't matter. The fact that it was made in 1938 or 39 didn't matter. It was just great. So I just kept watching that stuff.
Yeah, I remember back when there were video stores, I went through a real phase where I just decided to take out black and white movies, Hitchcock and whoever it was, right? And just loving them. So I just sort of have a passing interest in it. I like them. But, I don't retain all that you do. Like, you have a real Asperger's, like...
a real what?
Asperger's syndrome, that's just where somebody just locks in on a topic. Yeah. And that's their life. And they know everything about it.
Yeah, well, hopefully I'm broad about it, though. Because I'm astounded you'll meet... Well, I don't know if you'll meet somebody like this, but of the existence of people like this who... become obsessed with one film. They know everything about that film.
And they've seen it.
They've got the posters on the wall. They'll tell you about the scenes that were cut out and what happened on the set. And their whole life is a shrine to it. I mean, the internet proves this. You find websites where one person has devoted their whole website to the minutia of some bullshit topic. It might be a movie that we like, but Jesus Christ, come on. So hopefully I'm a little bit broader in my scope rather than just zeroing in on the life of Shecky Greene or just onto, because I like contemporary things too. Like
Yes.
I don't shun contemporary comedy in favor of old-timey comedy. I just like having the context overall, knowing that there's a precedent for other things in show business today that started a long time ago, you know. That's what I like knowing, sort of the lineage of everything.
Yeah, there's a timeline to it. And a lot of people just think, you know, like in jazz, I think jazz started in the bebop era. That's it. Nothing came before that. So are you introducing these old entertainers to a younger audience, or are you just peddling nostalgia to people that sort of lived it?
I don't really know. I mean, I think most people that come in to my website with the transcripts of the comedians are probably people that remember them for the most part, people that are in their 40s, 50s, and 60s frequent that site. The WFMU site is primarily a music site, and it does have the stigma of being kind of like a hipster related kind of site.
Right.
So it definitely gets an audience that is not necessarily fans of Shecky Greene or remembers him, but are fans of WFMU and trust whatever they crank out on their site and on their radio station, or just adherents of everything WFMU. So that does open me up to a much wider audience. And I try and approach a subject when I'm trying to think of things that I'm going to write about. I look at things that haven't been written about yet or that I'm interested in, and I go online and can't find anything about, and I will try and write about that to fill the void. So often when somebody Googles something, I'm the only thing that comes up. If you Google Shecky Greene or Mom's Mabley or the restaurant Dino's Lodge, you're going to be directed to my stuff at WFMU. So it gets a wide audience there of people that aren't simply nostalgists.
We have a caller. Jude is on the line.
Kliph, you were talking about how just because like TV comedies are old doesn't really make them great. How do you feel about like old radio comedies? Same thing? Or?
Same thing. You got to put things in the context of the era. But there's also things that really stand out from that era that hold up. Not much, but plenty in terms of the specific ones that do. Stan Freberg, Henry Morgan, and Bob and Ray are three that come to mind. Henry Morgan and Stan Freberg in the late 40s and throughout the 1950s were very corrosive. They were very satirical. You know, they weren't strictly doing set-up punch gags or situation gags, but a lot of the old-time radio comedies are very strict to specific formulas, and a lot of the episodes, again, are interchangeable. I think a lot of those shows that from that era that stand up, they don't stand up so much because of the material presented as the strength of some of the character actors that are performing within them. There's certain actors that really bring something to the material that is generally weak but can be funny in their own right, if that makes any sense.
Are you a big fan of radio comedies?
Sometimes on other networks, I listen to like old-timey radio, and if they're playing like a science fiction, I'll check that out. If it's comedy, I just forget about it. Or it's not a comedy, but a cowboy thing, I just forget about it. Comedies, some are good and some are bad, right? Like Groucho Marx, they were playing some of You Bet Your Life, and I was actually quite impressed.
Well, that's actually a good example of what I was talking about how I like comedians of that era in their natural element, or celebrities in their natural element, as opposed to doing contrived material. There's another non-fiction comedy show that is endlessly entertaining. You Bet Your Life is a great example of something that holds up. It's just real people being real, being moderated by a great wit.
Mm-hmm. He was being kind of mean to the guests, which was a little edgy for that time.
Sure, nastiness. Nastiness is always funny.
Yeah,
Always.
okay. I'll let you two get on then. So
Thanks
for answering my questions.
We're talking with Kliph Nesteroff, comedy writer of the whole history of comedy, at least in the past century. I'm always amazed on your Classic Show Business blog when interview subject in a transcript throws out an impossibly arcane reference, forgotten, and you just roll right along and you offer some information on it. So you just store these facts up in your head.
For the most part. I did get stumped the other day.
Oh, tell me.
By a great character actor who you would recognize if you saw or heard, a guy named Marvin Kaplan. Never did stand-up. He was an actor, but God, was he ever a memorable character actor, and it was a thrill to have him on my phone because he's got one of these voices that is so distinct. If you've ever seen the movie It's a Mad, 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 Mad World with all those classic comedians, Marvin Kaplan is in a very famous scene where he plays a gas station attendant with Arnold Stang. And Jonathan Winters comes to the gas station and is insane and chases them around the gas station and destroys the gas station. It's a 10-minute sequence. And Marvin Kaplan he was in tons of sitcoms. I can't really do his voice, but he sort of has a milquetoast sort of personality. Every now and then you'll see him in an episode of Gomer Pyle, and Gomer Pyle is shopping. "Excuse me, sir, can I help you with anything? Please don't touch the merchandise. Please don't touch the merchandise, sir. No, it's store policy. It's nothing personal, you understand. Just don't touch the merchandise. Don't touch the merchandise, sir. Okay, thank you very And he was in the cartoon Top Cat. He played a character named Choo Choo. Sure thing, TC. Sure thing, TC. Oh, boy, Gloria, she sent me a Valentine. I'm just thrilled, TC. That was Marvin Kaplan, and I interviewed him the other day. And he knew tons of comic actors, but we were talking about character actors and how there was such a wide gamut of great character actors in comedy in the 40s and 50s and 60s. And like I say, may have been doing shitty TV, like, say, Gomer Pyle, but all the incidental characters were very memorable, funny actors. And he threw out a lot of names at me of character actors, and I had no idea. And he would say, "Well, do you remember such and such?" And I went, "No." "Well, of course, he was a lot like so-and-so." And I was like, "Oh, no." And then after a while of him saying, "Do you remember so-and-so? Do you remember, this character actor?" And I was like, no. After a while, I was so embarrassed. I just went, "Yes. Yeah, I do. Yeah. Oh, of course. Yes." And I really had no clue.
But now you do, though. That's the thing, right?
Well,
When you
yes.
speak to these people and you have to transcribe it so it gets etched in your head.
I learn a lot about show business from talking to old show business folks. And when I'm writing an article and I come out with it, I sound like an authority, when in reality, 40 days earlier, I knew nothing about the subject. So suddenly I sound like an expert, which is great. I'm a total fraud. I don't know anything about anything. If we were going back 10 years, there's no fucking way I would know anything about anything. No access to YouTube, no access to news archives. I don't understand how anybody delved into this shit before the internet.
Well, they didn't.
Yeah.
And that's why they got so many things wrong.
Maybe, but there was a lot of historians that never had sex and had bad facial hair. And I guess that's why they had to devote a lot more time to it than I do.
It's amazing because you interview these people, and a lot of them we've never heard of. The vast majority of us have never heard of. But then you get to one like Bill Dana, and you go, he's still alive? Right now, he's a guy that's not huge in the... He didn't have a great crossover. I guess he did back then. Well, right? He was huge.
Well, Bill Dana, was huge for a few years as a performer, but he was always big as a comedy writer.
Yeah, and producer, yeah.
He wrote one of the most famous sitcom episodes of all time, still to this day.
And just sound like the sweetest man.
He was a really nice guy. Yeah, Bill Dana was great.
Didn't have a bad word to say about anybody except for Ginger Rogers.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, for people that don't know, Bill Dana's famous character was Jose Jimenez. Which by these standards today is politically incorrect, but it was sort of a very sweet character, a very lovable Hispanic character, which Bill Dana voluntarily killed off in 1970 when the minority movements were very strong in the late 60s. But his writing claim to fame, other than being one of the head writers for Steve Allen, was in 1973. He wrote, or was it 71, he wrote the episode of All in the Family called Sammy's Visit, when Sammy Davis Jr. was the guest star, and the whole episode takes place in Archie Bunker's living room, and it's Sammy Davis Jr. and Carol O'Connor as Archie Bunker exchanging barbs. Bill Dana wrote that episode.
And it ended in a kiss.
Yeah.
So, but what blew me away was he worked with everybody. He knew the Three Stooges, just like a really broad range of characters from show business. And he just mentions them so matter-of-factly. Now, he's largely forgotten today. And I'm wondering, is he a star in his own little community, or does he just go along anonymously? Do you know?
I mean, if you want to stay working in show business at that age, you have to live in Los Angeles. And if you move away, with maybe the exception of New York, if you live anywhere else other than Los Angeles at that age, you are imposing retirement on yourself. You're not going to get any work. Bill Dana lives in Nashville.
Okay.
So basically, he can't complain about not working if he's living in Nashville.
And probably he's what? How old is he?
80, 83, 84.
Oh, okay.
Jack Carter is 89. He lives in Beverly Hills. He still works. He's one of the only guys that still works. He's last Sunday, 1 week ago from today, Jack Carter was on 2 different brand new shows simultaneously on 2 different channels. He was doing a voice on a new episode of The Family Guy last week, and he was on an episode of the TV show Shameless on Showtime, which stars William H. Macy.
Did you see it?
I saw the season premiere 2 weeks ago. I didn't see the one last week, no.
So he was on the season premiere.
He was
and
on the
how
season
was
premiere.
he?
He was hysterical. He stole the show. He played a bigot that owns the bar that William H. Macy's drunk character patronizes. And he was really, 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 really funny.
Oh, great. Now, you're working with Jack Carter now, aren't you?
I am ghostwriting Jack Carter's autobiography, yeah.
And how's that going?
So far, so good.
You spent time down in L.A. with him?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time at his place in Beverly Hills. He's got a gorgeous palatial estate.
Really? For him and his wife?
Him and his wife and his maid and groundskeepers.
Wow.
He's
he did very well.
He's been famous, although he's kind of forgotten now. He has been in show business since 1941, and he has been a star in show business since 1948.
Wow.
That's a long time. That's 73 years he's been in show business. He's 89. And like I say, he's still working. But I mean, the guy is just a wealth of show business history. You're talking about people that knew everybody. This guy knew everybody. He's 1 degree of separation from enormous stars.
Yeah.
1 degree of separation from Frank Sinatra, Humphrey Bogart, Jimmy Durante. Every fucking person you could name in the showbiz lexicon of the 20th century he's worked with, new and old. He was one of the first people to host a TV show, period. He had his own variety show. He had 3 different variety shows that he hosted between 1948 and 1950. Most people don't even realize that there was television.
There wasn't any TVs in 48.
You see that?
But he was hosting it.
He was hosting in an era that people think TV didn't exist. He hosted Cavalcade of Stars starting in 1949. He hosted The Jack Carter Show Saturday nights on NBC from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. It was called The Jack Carter Show. He was the first person to host a roast on television. He was the first person to host the Tony Awards. It goes on and on and on. Like his history is unbelievable.
Yeah, he had a bit of a stint on Broadway too. So there,
he starred in Broadway in 1956. The competing shows were My Fair Lady and South Pacific. His Broadway show debuted the day after My Fair Lady debuted for the very first time. His show was called Mr. Wonderful. It starred him and Sammy Davis Jr. It ran for a year. Yeah, he was a big star unlike a lot of the other comedians, he didn't just tell jokes. He was a very adept singer and dancer. An actor. He was in a lot of TV shows. He was in a lot of films. I mean, he was a very, very, very prolific comedian, and I would argue the most prolific stand-up comedian of all time.
Really? Well, as his ghostwriter, I bet you will argue that. Now, did you arrange a fee? You're not going to get a soap on a rope or anything for this.
All right, that's a reference to the Bill
Ginger
Dana
Roger.
Bill Dana interview. I got paid soap and a rope, but it is going along well. We're just about confirmed. This hasn't been confirmed yet, but it looks like Don Rickles will be writing the foreword to the book, and Carl Reiner will be writing the introduction to the book.
Incredible.
The Jack Carter autobiography.
Have you found a publisher?
I haven't even shopped it around yet. Firming up those 2 names will help with that. That's the whole reason. Most books don't necessarily have a foreword and an introduction, but if we can get Don Rickles' name and Carl Reiner's name attached to it, who are of that era and both still very much in the public eye, it will help me sell it to a publisher. But I'm just more concerned about completing the book because Jack is almost 90 years old. I want to make sure that as much of the work that I have to do with him gets completed first before anything else. But I have talked to a couple of people in the past week, yeah.
You are writing it in his voice, obviously, as the ghostwriter, so you can't really make any editorial comments or change anything that he is saying.
No,
right?
No,
Yeah.
I am basically taking his talking and turning it into writing.
Yeah.
Essentially, it's his voice, it's his stories, and he is one of these guys who is a great storyteller with a great memory, and above all, scathingly honest, which is the best of all. And
he's okay with that.
he is often called the most hated man in show business.
Oh, yeah?
And that is because he is so honest. And a lot of the other comics talk about how talented he is, what a legend he is, and how they hate his guts because he's such a jerk.
But you find him to be a sweetheart, right?
He's really sweet with me, yeah. But I understand that perception of him because it is, he just doesn't care. He will call a spade, and it is fucking hilarious. I saw a photo of him with Norm Crosby, forgotten stand-up comedian Norm Crosby, on his wall, and I asked him, I was like, do you still see Norm Crosby much? He goes, fuck him. I go, what? I thought you guys were like best friends. He goes, he's a thief. I go, what do you mean? He goes, I saw him get up at a funeral. He did all my jokes at the funeral. He's a scumbag. They were like best friends for 3 decades, but Jack's great.
Oh, man. Now, you talked about anxiety of interviewing people, and that's over the phone. Now, you fly down to L.A. to meet the guy in person, go to his house.
His palatial estate.
Palatial estate, not his house. What am I thinking?
His neighbor is Sidney Poitier.
Really? Yeah. So, but how was that? Were you really trepidatious about going into that? Or did he just make you feel at home right away?
He didn't make me feel home right away. But
No?
Well, I showed up. It's a little bit nerve-wracking, not so much because I was nervous to meet him or what it would be like or anything like that. The only thing that was a little bit strange was he had no idea of my age.
Oh, really?
Jack,
through all those phone calls?
Yeah, he just thought I was, an old guy that knew everything about his career, and Jack's almost 90, and here I show up on a bicycle. And I showed up, I rode to his house on a bicycle.
Propeller hat.
Yeah, and a propeller hat, wearing a beanie. He gave me the address. I talked to him over the phone. Actually, this was really funny. I phoned him when I got to town to get directions to his house. We were only on the phone for 3 minutes. And I was just getting directions. That's it. We weren't doing an interview. Somehow into the conversation over the phone, he managed to slip in the phrase, Sophia Loren was a Spanish whore. I was just getting directions to his house. Got to his house. I rang the doorbell on his palatial estate door and noticed that on the lawn there was a blackface lawn jockey.
Oh, my God.
It was like something out of Sunset Boulevard, the Norma Desmond character in Sunset Boulevard, the old faded silent star. She still lives in this mansion, and there's a butler there that treats her like a star, but she's forgotten. His maid came to the door, answered the door. I said, I'm here to see Jack. And she just nodded and walked away and started screaming, Senor! Senor! Jack walked to the door with his walker. Took about 5 minutes and goes, You Kliph? I said, yeah. He goes, and turned around and walked into the house, which I guess was my cue to follow him inside. Yeah. And we walked into his den. But before we got to the den, actually, I walked through the front door. The first thing you see once you walk into Jack Harder's palatial estate is on the left, there's a solarium full of plants. And in the middle of all the plants, there is a bust of him, like a sculptor's bust of Jack Carter. We walked into his den, and on the wall above the fireplace is an oil painting of him.
Jack Carter.
On the other wall is a different oil painting of Jack Carter.
Did you ask him about it?
Yes. One of them, the one with the butterfly collar, was one that was painted for him by a guy in Vegas who came up to him in Vegas in the early 70s and asked if he could do his portrait. He said, sure. And Jack described him as a flaming faggot from New York. Did a good job. And then the other painting, the other oil painting on the other wall was the one that hung in the Beverly Hills Friars Club. In the hallway of the Beverly Hills Friars Club, they had oil paintings of all the legendary comics, George Jessel, Jack Benny, George Burns, and this was Jack Carter's painting that hung at the Friars that was on the wall.
Well, it's good that he didn't commission them himself, right? He has to put them somewhere. Who did the bust?
I don't know who did the bust, but it was of Jack Carter in the 50s. Like it was
in his prime, really.
Yes, exactly. So I don't know who did that. I didn't ask. I just took a photo and that was it.
How long will this book be? Like, I want a big, juicy book, not one of the Don Rickles, barely covering a story.
I have no idea how long it will be. I really don't know. Jack's got a lot of stories. They're all good. I'll tell you this much. He's been, over the course of his career, he's been targeted by the mob no less than 6 times.
And why was he targeted?
Because you were in that world.
Yeah.
He was a notable figure who was constantly surrounded by the mob. He was a headliner in Las Vegas during Las Vegas in its prime. He was a headliner in Miami Beach in its prime prior to Vegas, which the mob ran. He was almost murdered here in Vancouver by the mob. He was slipped a Mickey at the Penthouse nightclub for talking to a mobster's mole. He went back to the Hotel Georgia. He vomited for 5 days, had to cancel all his engagements in Los Angeles. He was shot at outside of High Steakhouse on Hornby Street here. He was attacked by a guy in a bar when he walked through the door at this restaurant in Miami Beach in the 50s. A man just attacked him out of nowhere, and they got in a big fist fight. And some guy came out of the kitchen and demolished this guy who had attacked Jack Carter and said, "I'm sorry you had to put up with that, Mr. Carter," and dusted off his hands and walked away. Jack Carter didn't know what the fuck had just happened. He'd just been attacked by a random guy. He phoned a friend of his that lived there in Miami Beach and said, "This guy just attacked me at the steakhouse." And his friend said, "What did he look like?" And Jack Carter described the guy that attacked him. And his friend said, "Okay, go back to your hotel. Stay there till I call you. I think you're in big trouble." So Jack Carter went back to his hotel room. He stayed there till 4 a.m. He gets a phone call from his friend. Says, "Okay, it's all clear. You're okay. That guy was such and such. He's a small-time bookie. I called Fischetti. He said it won't happen again. You're clear." Jack Carter was reading the newspaper next week. This guy that attacked him was found floating in the ocean, chopped up, floating in a garbage can.
Man. So he was part of that world, but was he saying anything? Because not everybody was attacked or had hits out on them. It had something to do with his act?
2 of the times that he was targeted by the mob, of which are not related to either of the anecdotes that I just mentioned, did have to do with something he said in his act. Once was in Chicago. He was picking on a woman in the audience for having a stupid-looking hat. Turns out she was the wife of a major Chicago mobster. So he got almost killed at the end of the night. And same thing happened in New York. He was playing the Rainbow Room in Rockefeller Center. And he picked on a table that was there, and they were one of the only tables in the crowd. It was just a horrible night, and so he just went to work on this lonely table. Turned out it was all mob guys as well. And same thing. I mean, I won't go into the details. It'll all be in the book.
It'll be in the book. You have to pick up the book. But yeah, not to go back to Bill Dana again, he did mention that he burnt some film or tape of a recording because the mob owned it, and he just didn't want to have anything to do with it.
No, what happened was
Close?
Roulette Records, Morris Levy, who became the basis for the record mogul character in The Sopranos. Morris Levy ran Roulette Records, who were famous in later years for Tommy James and the Shondells. And Tommy James wrote a good book about his association with Mo Levy, notorious New York gangster. And when comedy records were really hot in the 1960s, Mo Levy and his boys did something interesting. In order to cash in on the craze, they started recording comedians off of TV. So Bill Dana would appear on Steve Allen and do his stand-up act. They would record this with a reel-to-reel machine and then press it as a record and say, "The latest comedy album by Bill Dana on Roulette Records, brought to you by Morris Levy. Here it is." And Bill Dana saw it and realized that he didn't have a new comedy record out. Where did this record come from? So I guess Bill Dana's management contacted Roulette Records and said, "You've released this album without authorization. We need to talk about this. This is not okay. We'll sue you." To paraphrase, Roulette Records said, "Oh yeah, you're going to sue us? Well, we'll kill you." So Bill Dana started getting threats late at night at 3 and 4 in the morning. His family was threatened by the mob. They said, "Lay off if you know what's good for you." And they did lay off, and that record is still on the market. I own a copy of that record.
Hey, you own a copy of a lot of records, but you're downsizing, aren't you?
I did give away most of my
How do you feel about
comedy
that?
records. I'm fine with it.
Yeah.
LPs are heavy. They're an anchor.
Oh, yeah. But you had 1,000? How many?
I had 10,000 LPs, but I'm in the process of trying to emigrate to the United States of America, so I can't be moving with all these records. It's too much of a hassle.
Yeah, why do you want to move there?
Job opportunities.
Such as?
I got a sort of a job offer last year in Los Angeles. I was tracked down by... it's interesting. I've been tracking down all these old guys to do interviews and stuff. I got tracked down by an old guy without any prompting from myself. It was the kind of guy that I would interview tracked me down out of nowhere. Yeah, it was George Schlatter, the man who created Laugh-In and gave Lily Tomlin her start, gave Goldie Hawn her start.
Wow.
Went on to produce the Grammys for a decade. And
so he had been reading your stuff and contacted you?
He read the article that I wrote about Moms Mabley for WFMU about 5 years ago. And he phoned me out of the blue in Vancouver. And again, he had no idea how old I was. I don't think he knew I was in Canada either. But he said, well, let me tell you something. You did a hell of a job there. You're a hell of a writer. I mean, you seem to know more about Moms Mabley than anybody. I mean, well, you did a hell of a job. I've been in comedy a long time there, kid. I don't know how old are you. How old are you? I'm 30 years old. 30 years old? Jesus fucking Christ. Oh, my God. Well, let me tell you. You're in Los Angeles or are you in New York? Where are you? Canada. Jesus Christ. Well, we got to get you down here. I mean, we got to do something together. Let me tell you something, kid. Okay, so here's the thing. We read the Moms Mabley. You did a hell of a job. And this is really the way he talks, by the way. And a mile a minute. He goes, well, you're from Canada. Well, we gave Lord Michaels his first job. He's a Mountie. We brought him down, had him laughing. Well, when I was with Lily, Goldie and me, well, let me tell you a little something about Alan Suze. Went on and
Alan
on.
Suze. I haven't heard that name in a while.
And anyways, he goes, in a nutshell, he goes, we read your article about Moms Mabley. We thought it was great.
I got that.
Yeah. Me and Whoopi, we're producing a film about Moms Mabley, and we're thinking maybe we should bring you on board. Maybe we could do a little something with you. Maybe you could write it. You're a hell of a writer. So we'll talk as the days go on here, and Whoopi and I are going to be meeting next week, and she's going to read your thing, and blah, 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 blah. I had to give him my pitch that I'm Canadian. I can't legally work in the United States, and he offered to help. So I went and procured a bunch of letters of endorsement from notable folks in the industry to go put that towards a package for getting a green card or a working visa. So I got a lot of nice letters, One was from one of those writers from Vanity Fair. I got, some nice letters from the guys that work on The Daily Show, that work at The Onion. Leonard Maltin wrote me a nice letter endorsing my research abilities. Zach Galifianakis wrote me a nice letter endorsing my comedy writing abilities. So I put together this package. And George Schlotter's been trying to sell this film that he's co-producing with Whoopi Goldberg about the life of Moms Mabley, and he wanted to bring me on board. Nothing's concrete, though. Nothing has happened in terms of signing a contract. We don't really know what's going to happen with the film. They did sell the idea to HBO, so I've been talking to this woman from HBO, but they don't know what direction the project's going to take or whether they're going to go ahead with it because they don't know if there's going to be enough interest in a film about Moms Mabley, but they want me involved in some capacity. So basically, I'm waiting. Wow. And when I went to Los Angeles this past September and met with Jack Carter at his palatial estate, I also met with George Schlatter at the same time and went to his office, his building, which is a building, and that was also a fascinating, interesting afternoon.
And were you about to say another job offer?
Well, when I sat down with George Schlatter in his office, I said, well, what's the status of the project? And he said, well, it's a tough sell. It's a tough sell. You know who Moms Mabley is. I know who Moms Mabley is. Whoopi knows who Moms Mabley is. But the world doesn't know who Moms Mabley is. But we got to get you down here. We got to get you a job. What's your background? Tell me about your background. And I told him, well, I used to do stand-up. He picks up the phone. He goes, you want a week at the Comedy Store? I'll call him right now. I'll get you a week at the Comedy Store. I was like, no. I don't do stand-up anymore. He goes, we're doing this thing with Larry King. Well, I'll get you to write for Larry King. Well, Lily, you think you could write sketches for Lily Tomlin? I was like, sure. He goes, okay, good. Let's see, we're doing this thing. We're thinking about doing a remake of Laugh-In. We'll get you to write that. He was just rattling these things off. It was amazing, though. His office is like something from it's like a 1930s movie mogul's setup, It's like walking into Louis B. Mayer's office or something. The distance from the front door of his office to his desk is this incredible walk. It takes days to get to his desk, and you have to walk past all these incredible photos.
It's like a Hall of Fame.
Hall of Fame, him with Betty Davis, him with John Wayne, him with Richard Nixon, him with everybody in the history of show business.
How old a man is he?
He's 78.
Okay.
And the shelf behind his desk, this just giant shelf, takes up the whole wall, and it's just Emmys, gold records, everything you could imagine. And in fact, at the start of this, I guess you could call it a very informal job interview. At the start of our meeting, an old man waddled into his office, just walked right in and said, oh, I'm sorry. George, sorry to interrupt. Just quick question. And George Schlatter goes, yes, Bert, what is it? Where can I go to get my Emmys refurbished? Mine are looking ragged. And he's like, oh, you got to go to that place there on Pico, the Pico and Olympic. There's a place you're going to. And he goes, Bert, I want you to meet Kliph Nesteroff. He's 10 years old. He knows more about show business than anybody you've ever met. And he goes, oh, nice to meet you. And the guy leaves. And George Schlatter goes, that's Bert Nadella. He needs to get his Emmys refurbished. They're pretty old. He won them for producing Get Smart.
And still working, though.
No, I think Bert Nadella just hangs out in George Schlatter's office. Yeah.
Polishes his Emmys.
He came in and asked him about what they were going to do about the boat. There's all this shit on the boat. You're going to get rid of that shit that's on the boat, George? I told you I'll do it next week. Well, it's been sitting there for months.
But George still has his hand in it, right?
In show business?
Yeah.
Sure,
still producing.
Yeah. Well, he makes a lot of money off of Laugh-In as an entity. When the DVDs came out, he owns the show. Mm-hmm. So he makes money off that. Also, he used to produce a Sweeps Week special that you might remember on ABC in the 1980s called the American Comedy Awards, which was kind of a cheesy annual variety thing where they bring out old comics and they had these very arbitrary awards. Last year, Comedy Central had something called the Comedy Awards. Well, George Schlatter, savvy businessman that he is, he owned the copyright to the phrase Comedy Awards, and he sold that to Comedy Central for an enormous sum.
Yeah.
So even though he's not creating or generating a great deal in recent history, George Schlatter, he's still very much he's also a cultural figure in show business in Los Angeles. Like, he's a Bernie Brillstein kind of guy. You know, everybody knows him. He's worked with everybody. I think he's also arranged a lot of Democrat Party fundraisers. He's one of those big boosters of that.
What's the ageism like in Hollywood? Like, everybody knows him, but do they just sort of tolerate him? Like, oh yeah, that's the guy. He did something a long time ago. Or is he still relevant?
Somebody like George Schlatter is a bit different. With actors, it's easier to dismiss, you know, but you still have to deal with people that own copyrights on things or own. He can still get things done. Let me put it that way. The fact that he and Whoopi Goldberg are collaborating says something in and of itself. And the fact that they're able to get HBO to come on board with this project is another thing that speaks to, I think, his clout to a degree. I don't think he's anywhere near as powerful as he would have been in 1968. Of course not. But I was impressed.
As you're sitting in his office, in the Hall of Fame office, and he's throwing these potential jobs at you, and you're just going, yeah, sure, like I could do that.
Yeah.
In your mind, are you just doing that old show business thing, just say you can do anything?
Yeah, of course.
And in your head, you're going, I don't know if I could write sketches for Lily Tomlin. Or do you think, no, that's something I could do?
No, I mean,
I
of course I could do any of those, but of course, I'm also saying all of those things. He's not asking me if I can ride a horse or tap dance. He's asking me if I can write, and that's all that I do.
Yeah.
So, certainly.
And different kind of writing, though.
Well, I mean, if you're, hypothetically, if you're a writer, you should be able to write anything. If you're a funny writer, if you're born funny, you know, I'm not writing or generating comedy material these days. You know, it's much more, not so much entertainment writing as maybe analytical writing or just nonfiction writing. But if you're born funny, you can write funny.
Now, on your blogs, you put up, you talk about embedding videos and newspaper articles. Like, are these ones that you find in your research online, or do you go to the library and you get them? Because some of them are Vancouver, I see. That requires a lot of scanning. Is that what you're doing?
No, God, no. I don't even know how to do that.
Okay.
I don't know how to upload a video to the internet.
Yeah, no, not the videos.
But I don't know how to scan anything.
Like those we see ads, you know, like Jack Harder playing The Cave, whatever. Where do you find these?
That's all off of Google.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all the Google News archives, and I use the Google Books has a archive of Billboard magazines, newspaper archives. Yeah, it's all off the internet.
And how did you hook up with WFMU in the beginning? They didn't know who you were. You just pitched them a story?
I'm trying to remember. I think, well, I used to Google things, obscure pieces of audio, or if I found a weird record in a thrift store, I would Google it to get more information. And often, the only information that I would find on the internet was on WFMU. And that happened countless times, and they just seemed to be like a kindred spirit. So I felt maybe I could do something with them. I think I shot an email to the station manager, Ken Friedman, and said, "How do you become a contributor?" And he said, "I guess you ask, but nobody's ever asked us before."
Oh, so you're the first contributor?
Yeah. So I said, do you have an example of your work? And so I sent him this article I wrote, the only thing I had written for the internet. It was a history of Christian Archie comics that actually also was resulted in a connection with Vanity Fair. I'd written this blog post on a blog that nobody had ever read other than nobody. And I got a phone call from Vanity Fair asking if they could interview me because they were writing an article about Archie comics, and that was really sweet. And I was quoted in this article, and they called me witty, which was, a nice hyperbole. And from that article was the only thing I had as an example of my work, and I sent that to WFMU, and they liked it and brought me on board.
Now, you've learned a lot. You say that you learned a lot from these interviews over the years. Has the psyche of comics changed from the old showbiz ones to the current ones?
I think
you've been around.
No, the thing that I've taken away is the concept of fame is it's a fascinating how famous somebody can be for so long and then suddenly be so not famous.
So true.
Or how famous somebody can be for such a short period of time and then be so unfamous. Or how somebody can be not famous their entire career, yet work with everybody imaginable in show business and sustain an incredible career financially while being a complete unknown the whole time. All these things I find fascinating because a lot of the guys I'm talking to, I don't know who they are. I just learned who they are a few weeks before and then discovered that they were enormous stars in 1949. The biggest person on the pop charts, highest rated radio show or TV show, starring in films with all kinds of huge stars whose names we do recognize. And then nothing. Something happened along the way where it just wasn't sustained. And some of them are bitter about it. Some of them aren't. Some of them walked away from show business. Some of them stayed with it. Some of them really, really, really hustle. Jack Carter's still working because he still hustles. Like, he works hard to get the gigs that he does. And then there's other people like Will Jordan, the impressionist, who remains very bitter, still alive. His claim to fame was doing an impression of Ed Sullivan, which was the Christopher Walken impression of its day.
But was he the first?
He was the first, and that's why he's very bitter. He feels like everybody who subsequently did an impression of Ed Sullivan was stealing his act.
Right.
But he has stuck to that for decades rather than, using his talent to generate new material to make up for that. But fame is what I learn about talking to these guys.
Yeah.
And how it's so subjective. There are people in China and India that are among the most famous people in the world that you and I have never heard of. Mm-hmm. So fame is very, very subjective and very fleeting.
Well, I guess some of them, the level-headed ones that I speak to that are in it now, know that. But I think when you're right in the middle of it, you tend to think, well, it's going to be like this forever. And then it's going to be a huge slap in the face when a year goes by and they're like, hey, but don't you remember me?
Well, I talked to Marilyn Michaels the other day, who was a noted female impressionist, not a female impersonator.
Yes.
A female
was
impressionist.
Was she the one on the Copycats?
Yes.
Oh, I could never remember her name, but as soon as you said it.
Yeah, and she was an excellent mimic. She
did great Barbra Streisand.
She did an uncanny Barbra Streisand. In fact, it was so uncanny that when Barbra Streisand got huge on Broadway starring in Funny Girl, she left to go to Hollywood to do movies, and they needed somebody to replace Barbra Streisand on Broadway, and they tapped Marilyn Michaels. She did a great impression of Barbra Streisand, even though she wasn't playing Barbra Streisand on stage. Yeah. But she had an amazing voice, which was comparable to Barbra Streisand, which is why her impression was so good. She didn't just do the mannerisms and exaggerate it. She could actually sing as adeptly as Barbra Streisand. And when she got that role, Marilyn Michaels was 20. She was 20 years old. She was already recording music for RCA at the age of 17, became known for a nightclub act at the age of 18 and 19, was cast in this starring Broadway musical at the age of 20, and progressively became more and more famous, was on the Dean Martin show, was on, every talk show, Johnny Carson, and then just kind of disappeared.
Yeah.
She was 20, 21, 22. She's still around. She still performs.
She does?
Sort of. But she's not famous. I think she's fine with that. I mean, she's famous in a circle. She's known within Manhattan where she lives. But she's known within Manhattan the same way that stand-up comics that you and I know are known within Vancouver.
Yeah.
They're headlining at Yuck Yucks. Wow. Well, they're headlining at the Comedy Club. You know, that's reaching a level of something.
Right.
But it's meaningless to people that are in New York or that are in Chicago. You know,
Does she know what happened?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. She has other things going on. She's a brilliant painter.
Right.
I think that's
so
how she made most of
didn't
her
work
money.
as hard as Jack Carter hustling. She just thought maybe, well, the offers will keep coming in, and then they stop.
It's hard to say. Sometimes people peak early, and then people don't want to use them anymore. I did see her in a 7-Up commercial with Rich Little from 1981, which makes me think that maybe she was really struggling, you know? But it's hard to say. And fame's a weird thing, you know? I think about fame, and when people want fame, you know who's famous? Every single weatherman in every city is famous.
Yeah.
Is that what people that want fame are aspiring to? You know, you're famous in Calgary because you're the weather person. You go to any other city, you're nothing. You're nobody. But you're famous, you know? It's those contradictions that I find fascinating.
Yeah, and you find the people now that just seek fame over everything on the reality programming and YouTube clips.
It's fascinating because
It's just for the sake of it.
But it's unsustainable. That's
Yeah.
the other thing. And I think a lot of people that do achieve that fame like that don't realize it's completely unsustainable. If you don't have any talent and you peak early too, I mean, that's probably going to be it. Unless you do something else like go and murder a bunch of people, you'll be famous again. But, you know, like it's not sustainable if it's just instant fame with no act, no talent, no lexicon, you know, no toolbox to back it up. I'm not saying Marilyn Michaels didn't have that, very much so. She had that toolbox. So I don't know what happened. But that's show business, right? There's luck and bad luck.
Yeah. So that transcript is on your blog, the Marilyn Michaels?
Not yet. There's
Okay.
several people I've interviewed: Marvin Kaplan, Marilyn Michaels, girl singer Monica Lewis, who was very famous in the late 40s and had a love affair with Ronald Reagan and with Kirk Douglas, and was married to the president of MCA. That transcript's not up yet, but she's a good example of being really, really famous once upon a time. Yeah, there's a bunch of interviews coming up on classic television showbiz that have not been posted yet.
How much, I mean, each research or each interview that you do now gives you more information to sock away in your brain. Are you finding that you're doing less research for each one? I mean, you obviously do a lot of research and get your questions out, but you just know so much based on the cumulative effect of the past interviews.
Well, I mean, I have enough.
Is it getting easier that way?
I have knowledge stored in my head to a degree that if something comes up within the interview, I can say something off the cuff that, you know, is related that comes up. But I don't do any less research. I mean, I really research people's specific careers and specific things that happen to them. But it's part of a greater whole, you know.
Mm-hmm.
If they mention the Copacabana in conversation, I can say, you know, what was Jules Podell like? He was the front man for the mob that ran the Copacabana. What do you remember about Jules Podell? And they'll have an anecdote there. So I might not have something like that written down. I can't say it's getting easier because I've never found it that difficult, because I enjoy it.
I meant labor intensive for, sitting down and researching somebody. Is that hours? Is that an hour? What is that?
Depends who the person is.
Yeah.
Depends how long their career was. Depends how famous they were. You know, if they weren't that famous to begin with, then there's not going to be that much material out there.
But it is conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. You are the Nardwuar of showbiz interviews. Like just the details. No, that's not an insult, Kevin. And I know you're a friend of Nardwuar too. The details that he gets when he interviews rock stars. Right?
I think the only reason that details or research intensiveness stands out in anything that I do, or as you mentioned, Nardwuar, is because it's juxtaposed with all the people that don't do research.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's not that I'm doing anything any more special. It's just that people will interview, you know, say Shecky Greene and go, "What was Vegas like in its prime?"
Yeah.
So did you know the Rat Pack? What were the Rat Pack really like?
Yeah.
Go fuck yourself is what the answer should be. Like, I mean, Jesus Christ. When I interviewed Steve Martin, it was about something very specific. But, Steve Martin is notorious for not allowing very many interviews, you know? He does it every now and then to promote a movie. And you'll see him on these promotional junkets, and the interviewer has the chance to ask him anything in the world. Like, it's a huge scoop to sit down with Steve Martin. And the questions are, what was it like working with Queen Latifah?
Yeah.
Was that fun? That must have been a lot of fun. This is a incredible opportunity, and that is the question people come up with. It blows my mind. Yeah. So I don't think I'm doing anything in particularly unique.
No, and it's great. I mean, those types of interviewers ruin it for the rest of us. I'll include myself in that. But because
I mean,
your name is bigger, and so now people will go, oh, well, this guy's going to give me, something to talk about, something of depth. So I will talk to him, right? For somebody who works at a newspaper, such as myself, who they may not have heard of, they're going to go, I got to speak to somebody from a newspaper. Glenn Wool was here 2 weeks ago, and he said he gets questions like, so where do you get your material?
Yeah,
all
the time.
All the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. When you do an interview, Guy, with somebody who's coming to town, don't you often have to be like in a key of somebody from the Vancouver province, somebody from this radio station, somebody from this newspaper, or maybe
do you mean all on the line together?
No, like the people that you're interviewing, sometimes they have an interview scheduled at 10, one at 10:15, one at 10:30.
Occasionally, yeah.
And then you have to fit into that time frame.
Oh, that's the worst.
So I don't have to do that because I'm not interviewing people they're not promoting something. Yeah. So that's a bit easier, I can get off the phone when they tell me, like Shelley Berman did, can we wrap this up? My arm is tired. I don't know if you know, but I'm elderly. Sure, Shelley, we can wrap it up.
Yeah. The bigger ones now, yes, you will get 15, 20 minutes, and they got to wrap it up. Somebody will come on the line and say, thank you, Guy, your time's up. But, most people that I'm interviewing, still comedy is still kind of niche, and I usually get what I need. Yeah. So it's not quite like that. Yeah. So who's on your wish list? I know you got to work fast, as we said.
Yeah, my wish list. Well, somebody on my wish list died about a month ago, which really sucked because I did phone his place 3 times, and all 3 times he just wasn't feeling well. And
Who was
I guess
that?
That was why. Hal Cantor, who goes way back. Hal Cantor was a comedy writer. I'm fascinated because he wrote for Olsen and Johnson in the late 30s before he started writing for Bob Hope in the 1940s, and he wrote for radio, he wrote for movies, he wrote Bob Hope films, he wrote Elvis films, he directed some Elvis films. But he was really considered, of that era, the funniest guy, a real cynic, a real witty cynic, He wrote a good book, an autobiography in 1995 on a really small-time esoteric label that is just full of wonderful stories, very, very honest, too, talking about what pricks people like Al Jolson were, and Eddie Cantor was a douche.
We love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, of course. So Hal Cantor died. On my wish list, well, I have the phone number on my desk right now. He's a bit aloof. His name is Mort Saul. He's hard to pin down. I have talked to him, but he always seems to be in the middle of something else, like buying a bagel. He has a cell phone, which is always fun when the elderly have a cell phone. I did something rather unethical. He said, I'll phone you back. I'm at a bagel shop. I'll phone you back. And he didn't quite hang up his phone properly. So I got to listen to him speak to the woman at the bagel counter about whether or not she watched the Tonys, and Mort Saul talk about how horrible the Tonys were last night for about 10 minutes until he actually shut off his phone. So just in case he died the next day, I would have that on tape, and I do. But I got to phone him. He's on the wish list. Also on the wish list are Jerry Lewis and Jackie Mason, because those two, not only are they both legendary, they're also considered kind of comedy car wrecks in a lot of ways, all through their career, right from the inception of their careers in the 1950s to the present day. Jackie Mason and Jerry Lewis may be 2 of the most polarizing figures, and I would love to get in depth with them.
Is it going to happen, do you think?
I don't know.
Close?
I don't know. Jerry Lewis, I've heard, can be very, very gracious and very, very sweet. I haven't really gotten a response from his people yet. I think his people is his wife, but I haven't heard back yet. And then Jackie Mason, I haven't heard back from at all. But he does a lot of interviews for small-time right-wing talk shows. So maybe he'll do something for the small-time internet. We'll see.
Yeah. And Woody Allen, wouldn't that be great? Or is he too contemporary?
Woody Allen would be great. I mean, I have a good relationship with Dick Cavett.
Yeah.
Maybe I should. I was thinking maybe I should interview Marshall Brickman first. He's a legendary comedy icon that nobody knows because he's in the shadows. But
he was interviewed for the Woody Allen documentary that aired
was
few
he?
weeks
Yeah,
ago.
I didn't watch it. Yeah, Brickman's amazing. Marshall Brickman. Everybody thinks that Woody Allen is a one-man operation, but Marshall Brickman deserves a lot of credit. Helped write a lot of Woody Allen's stand-up material. Mm-hmm. Of course, co-wrote Annie Hall and also created The Swedish Chef and Statler and Waldorf for Jim Henson.
I did not know that. Well, it's got to be close to midnight now. Let's see. Oh, jeez. All right, Kliph, it's been fascinating. We made up for the past 6 years, right? We look forward to more of your posts on classic showbiz.
Classic television showbiz.
Classic television showbiz.
And WFMU. And you can read many of my articles rewritten by other people in Vanity Fair.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
All right, Kliph, thanks. Next week, we've got Darcy Michael in studio. And I'll take it easy on Darcy. No, I won't. Thanks a lot.